Margaret Collins woke up at 5 in the morning, just like she had done every day for the past 15 years. Her small apartment was quiet and dark. She lived alone in a tiny place above a bakery on Oak Street. The smell of fresh bread always filled her home in the early morning hours. She was 62 years old and had gray hair that she kept in a simple bun. Her hands were rough and strong from years of hard work. Margaret had worked as a janitor at the Riverside Music Academy since. She was 47 years old. Every morning, she put on her blue uniform and walked the 6 blocks to work. The Riverside Music Academy was a fancy school for rich kids who wanted to learn music. The building was old and beautiful, with tall windows and marble floors. Students came from wealthy families and paid thousands of dollars to study there. They learned to play piano, violin, and other instruments. Most of them would never have to worry about money in their lives. Margaret's job was simple but important. She cleaned the classrooms, the hallways, and the practice rooms. She emptied trash cans and mopped floors. She wiped down the expensive pianos and made sure everything was perfect for the next day. The students and teachers walked past her every day, but most of them never really saw her. She was invisible to them. Just another worker in a blue uniform. They did not know her name or anything about her life. Margaret did not mind this. She was used to being overlooked. She had learned long ago that people like her were supposed to stay in the background, but Margaret had a secret. Every evening, after the last student went home and the teachers locked their offices, she would stay behind. She would walk slowly through the empty halls, listening to the silence. Then she would go to one of the practice rooms and sit at the piano. Margaret could play music. She could play it very well. Her fingers knew exactly where to go on the keys. She could make the piano sing with beautiful sounds, but she only played when no one was around. She only played in the empty rooms after dark. She had been doing this for 15 years. Every night she would play for an hour or two. Sometimes she played sad songs that made her remember her past. Sometimes she played happy songs that made her forget her troubles. The music was her secret friend. Margaret remembered when she was young. She was born in a small town called Millfield. Her family was poor, but her mother worked hard to give her a good life. When Margaret was 6 years old, her mother bought an old piano from a neighbor. It cost $50, which was a lot of money for them. Margaret's mother could not read music, but she wanted her daughter to learn. She found a piano teacher in town who agreed to teach Margaret for $5 a week. Margaret learned quickly. She had a natural gift for music. Her small fingers could make the old piano sound like magic. By the time Margaret was 12, she was playing music that amazed everyone in town. Her piano teacher said she had never seen a child with such talent. Margaret could hear a song once and play it perfectly. She could also create her own music, making up beautiful melodies that no one had ever heard before. When Margaret was 16, something wonderful happened. A man from the city came to hear her play. He was a teacher from a famous music school called Juilliard. He listened to Margaret play for 30 minutes, then he offered her a full scholarship. This meant she could go to the best music school in the country for free. Margaret's mother cried with joy. Her daughter was going to have a better life. Margaret was going to be a real musician. She was going to play in big concert halls and make records. She was going to be famous. Margaret went to New York City when she was 18. Juilliard was like a dream. She studied with the best teachers in the world. She practiced 8 hours a day. She learned to play music by great composers, like Mozart and Beethoven. She also learned to play jazz and blues for 2 years. Margaret was the happiest she had ever been. She was learning so much. She was getting better every day. Her teachers said she had the talent to become a professional musician. They said she could play with orchestras or give concerts all over the world, but then something terrible happened. Margaret's mother got very sick. The doctors said she had cancer. Margaret's mother was alone back home, and she needed someone to take care of her. Margaret had to make a choice. She could stay in school and follow her dreams, or she could go home and help her mother. Margaret chose her mother. She left Juilliard and went back to Millfield. She took care of her mother for 3 years until she died. During this time, Margaret could not practice much. She was too busy working and caring for her sick mother. After her mother died, Margaret was lost. She was 23 years old and had no money. She had missed too much school to go back to Juilliard. She felt like her chance was gone forever. She moved to the city and took whatever job she could find. For many years, Margaret worked in restaurants and offices. She cleaned houses and worked in stores. She never told anyone about her music. It felt like a dream from long ago. Sometimes she would see a piano in a store window, and her heart would hurt. She missed playing so much. When Margaret was 47, she saw a job posting at the Riverside Music Academy. They needed a janitor. Margaret applied and got the job. She thought it might be nice to work around music again, even if she was just cleaning. On her first day at the academy, Margaret heard students practicing. The sound of pianos and violins filled the air. It was beautiful, but it also made her sad. She remembered when she used to play like that. She remembered her dreams of being a real musician. That first night, after everyone had gone home, Margaret found herself in a practice room. There was a beautiful grand piano in the center of the room. Margaret looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then she sat down and put her fingers on the keys. The music came back to her like an old friend. Her fingers remembered what to do. She played a simple song first, then something more difficult. She played for 2 hours that night. When she finally stopped, she was crying. She had found her music again. From that night on, Margaret played every evening after work. She was careful to make sure no one saw her. She would lock the doors and turn off most of the lights. She would play softly so no one would hear. This became her routine for the next 15 years. Margaret knew she was not supposed to use the pianos. They were for students and teachers only, but she could not stop herself. The music was the only thing that made her feel alive. It was the only thing that reminded her of who she used to be. During the day, Margaret was just a janitor. She cleaned and mopped and emptied trash. Students and teachers treated her like she was invisible. But at night, alone with the piano, she became herself again. She became the musician she was meant to be. Margaret never told anyone about her secret. She lived 2 lives. During the day, she was a simple cleaning woman. At night, she was an artist. She had learned to be happy with this arrangement. She thought this was how her life would always be. But sometimes, late at night when she was playing, Margaret would wonder what might have been. What if she had stayed in school? What if she had become a famous musician? What if people knew who she really was? Margaret always pushed these thoughts away. She told herself to be grateful for what she had. She had a job and a place to live. She had her music, even if it was secret. That was enough. That had to be enough. She never imagined that one day everything would change. She never imagined that her secret would be discovered. She never imagined that the wealthy people who ignored her every day would soon see her in a completely different way. Margaret Collins was about to discover that sometimes the most important moments in life come when you least expect them. The annual Donor Gala was the biggest event of the year at the Riverside Music Academy. Rich people from all over the city came to donate money to the school. They wore expensive clothes and jewelry. They ate fancy food and drank expensive wine. They talked about how important music education was for young people. Margaret had worked at many of these events over the years. Her job was to make sure everything was clean and perfect. She would arrive early to set up chairs and clean the floors. During the event, she would stay in the background, emptying trash and cleaning up spills. This year was different. The gala was being held in the main recital hall, which was the most beautiful room in the academy. The walls were covered with dark wood panels. There were paintings of famous musicians hanging everywhere. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, filling the room with warm light. But there was something unusual in the center of the room. An old piano sat on the stage. It was a 1920 Steinway Grand, which would normally be worth a lot of money. But this piano had been damaged in a flood 3 months earlier. Water had gotten inside the instrument and ruined many of the parts. The piano looked beautiful from the outside, but it was broken on the inside. Some of the keys would stick when you pressed them, other keys made no sound at all. The pedals at the bottom barely worked. The school had planned to throw it away, but they had not done it yet. Margaret knew about the piano because she had been there when the flood happened. She had helped clean up the water damage. She had watched sadly as the workers moved the broken piano to the recital hall. She knew that a beautiful instrument had been ruined. The evening of the gala, Margaret arrived at work early. She put on her blue uniform and began preparing the room. She arranged the chairs in perfect rows. She polished the floors until they shone. She made sure every detail was perfect. As the guests began to arrive, Margaret moved to the back of the room. She watched as men in expensive suits and women in beautiful dresses filled the space. They laughed and talked loudly. They seemed to own the world. The guests were mostly older people who had made a lot of money in business. They gave money to the academy because it made them feel important. They liked to think they were helping young musicians achieve their dreams. Robert Whitmore was the chairman of the school's board of directors. He was a tall man with gray hair and a loud voice. He owned several companies and had more money than most people could imagine. He was used to being the most important person in any room. Margaret had cleaned Mr. Whitmore's office many times. He never said hello to her or even looked at her. To him, she was just part of the furniture. She was there to serve him, nothing more. During the first part of the evening, the guests ate dinner and listened to speeches. The school's director talked about how much money they needed for new instruments. A famous musician gave a speech about the importance of music education. The guests clapped politely and wrote checks. As the evening went on, the guests drank more wine. They became louder and more confident. They began to think they were funnier and more important than they actually were. This is when things began to change. After dinner, the guests moved around the room to look at the displays. There were photos of famous students who had attended the academy. There were programs from important concerts. There were awards the school had won. But what caught everyone's attention was the broken piano on the stage. People began to point at it and ask questions. Why was there a damaged piano in the middle of the room? What was wrong with it? Could anyone play it? Mr. Whitmore had been drinking wine all evening. He was feeling very confident and wanted to entertain his friends. He walked up to the piano and pressed a few keys. Some worked, some did not. He laughed and called out to his friends. "Look at this old wreck," he said loudly. "Half the keys don't even work. What a piece of junk." The other guests gathered around the piano. They began pressing keys and laughing at the broken sounds. They thought it was very funny. They joked about how the school should throw it away. Margaret was cleaning tables in the back of the room. She could hear the guests laughing at the piano. It made her feel sad. She knew that even though it was broken, it was still a beautiful instrument. It deserved respect, not mockery. As Margaret worked, she tried to ignore the noise from the stage. But the guests were getting louder. They were having fun making jokes about the broken piano. They were treating it like a toy. Then Mr. Whitmore had an idea. He had been drinking more wine, and his judgment was not very good. He looked around the room until he saw Margaret cleaning cables. A mean smile crossed his face. "Hey," he called out loudly. "Hey, you there, the cleaning lady." Margaret looked up surprised. No one at these events ever spoke to her directly. She pointed to herself, not sure if he was talking to her. "Yes, you," Mr. Whitmore said. "Come over here." Margaret felt her face turn red. Everyone in the room was looking at her. She did not want to be the center of attention. She walked slowly toward the stage, carrying her cleaning supplies. "What's your name?" Mr. Whitmore asked. "Margaret," she said quietly. "Margaret Collins." "Well, Margaret," Mr. Whitmore said with a big smile, "we've been looking at this broken piano, and we think it needs someone to play it. How about you give it a try?" The guests began to laugh. They thought this was a great joke. The idea of the cleaning lady playing piano was very funny to them. They had no idea that Margaret could actually play. Margaret stood at the bottom of the stage, feeling embarrassed. She could feel her heart beating fast. She did not know what to say. She did not want to play in front of all these people. "Oh, come on," Mr. Whitmore said. "Don't be shy. Just play us a little song. It doesn't matter if it sounds bad." "The piano is already broken." The other guests began to encourage her. They clapped and called out for her to play. They were having fun at her expense. To them, this was entertainment. They wanted to see the cleaning lady embarrass herself. Margaret looked around the room. She saw the faces of the wealthy guests. They were all watching her with amusement. They expected her to fail. They expected her to make a fool of herself. Some of the guests had already taken out their phones. They wanted to record what they thought would be a funny moment. They wanted to share it with their friends later. Margaret felt trapped. She could not just walk away. Mr. Whitmore was her boss's boss. If she refused to play, she might lose her job. She needed this job. She could not afford to make him angry. I don't really know how to play," Margaret said softly. This made the guests laugh even more. They thought she was being modest. They thought it would be even funnier if she tried to play without knowing how. "That's okay," Mr. Whitmore said. "Just bang on the keys a little, see what sounds come out. We're not expecting a concert here." Margaret looked at the piano. She had walked past it many times while cleaning. She knew exactly which keys were broken and which ones still worked. She knew this piano better than anyone in the room. She also knew that she was about to do something that would change her life. Forever, she was about to reveal her secret to a room full of strangers. She was about to show them who she really was. Margaret took a deep breath and walked up the steps to the stage. The guests became quieter as she sat down at the piano bench. They were waiting for the show to begin. Margaret placed her hands on the keys. She could feel the familiar touch of the ivory keys under her fingers. It had been many years since she had played in front of other people. She was nervous, but she was also excited. The room became completely quiet. Even the servers stopped what they were doing to watch. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about her mother, who had bought her first piano. She thought about her teachers at Juilliard, who had believed in her talent. She thought about all the nights she had played alone in the empty practice rooms. Then she opened her eyes and began to play. What happened next would shock everyone in the room. The guests who had been laughing at her were about to discover that they had made a terrible mistake. They were about to learn that the simple cleaning lady they had been mocking was actually something extraordinary. Margaret Collins was about to show them what real music sounded like. She was about to prove that talent and beauty can be found in the most unexpected places. She was about to change not only her own life, but the lives of everyone who was watching. The broken piano was about to sing again. And Margaret Collins was about to step out of the shadows and into the light. Margaret's fingers touched the keys of the broken piano. The room was completely silent. Everyone was watching her, waiting to see what would happen. Some people were smiling, expecting to be entertained by her failure. Others had their phones, ready to record what they thought would be a funny moment. Margaret tested a few keys quietly. She pressed them gently to see which ones worked and which ones did not. She had cleaned this piano many times, so she already knew some of its problems. But now she needed to understand exactly what sounds she could make. The guests began to whisper to each other. They thought she was taking too long. They wanted her to start playing so they could laugh. Mr. Whitmore was getting impatient. "Come on, Margaret," he said. "Just play something, anything." Margaret nodded. She had made her decision. She was going to play, but not the way they expected. She was going to show them what this broken piano could really do. She began with a simple melody. It was a piece by Chopin called Nocturne in E-flat major. It was a beautiful, sad song that she had learned many years ago at Juilliard. But she could not play it the normal way because too many keys were broken. So Margaret did something amazing. She changed the song to work with the broken piano. When she came to a key that did not work, she played a different note that sounded just as good. When she reached a section where several keys were broken, she created a new melody that was even more beautiful than the original. The guests stopped whispering. They stopped smiling. They began to realize that something unexpected was happening. This was not the joke they had expected. This was real music. Margaret's fingers moved across the keys like they were dancing. She played softly at first, then louder. She used the working keys to create sounds that no one thought possible. She made the broken piano sing. The melody was sad and beautiful. It reminded people of things they had lost. It made them think about people they had loved who were no longer with them. It made them feel emotions they had forgotten. Mr. Whitmore's smile disappeared. He had expected Margaret to embarrass herself. Instead, she was creating something beautiful. He did not know what to think. Margaret continued playing. She moved from the Chopin piece into something else. It was a jazz song that she had learned to play late at night in the empty practice rooms. She changed it to fit the broken piano, making it sound like a conversation between the working keys and the silent ones. The guests were amazed. They had never heard anyone play a broken piano like this. They had never heard anyone make music out of what seemed like a hopeless situation. Margaret was not just playing the piano. She was making it tell a story. Some of the guests began to recognize that Margaret was not just lucky, she was skilled. She was very skilled. This was not something that just anyone could do. This required years of training and natural talent. As Margaret played, she began to feel something she had not felt in many years. She felt free. She felt like herself again. For 15 years, she had hidden her music. She had played only in secret, only when no one was watching. Now she was playing for a room full of people. And it felt wonderful. The broken piano responded to her touch like an old friend. She knew exactly how to make it sound good. She knew which keys to press gently and which ones to hit firmly. She knew how to use the pedals that barely worked. She was making music with an instrument that everyone else had given up on. Margaret moved into a more complex piece. It was a sonata by Mozart that required both hands to play different melodies. At the same time, this was very difficult on a normal piano. On a broken piano, it should have been impossible, but Margaret found a way. She used her left hand to play the bass notes that still worked. She used her right hand to play the melody, skipping over the broken keys and creating new patterns. She made the music flow like water, smooth and natural. The guests were no longer just watching, they were listening, really listening. They were hearing music the way it was meant to be heard. They were experiencing something beautiful and unexpected. Margaret played for 20 minutes. She moved from classical music to jazz to blues. She played sad songs and happy songs. She played songs that made people want to dance and songs that made them want to cry. She played songs that told stories about love and loss and hope. With each song, Margaret became more confident. She remembered what it felt like to be a musician. She remembered the joy of creating something beautiful. She remembered why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. The guests began to change. The wealthy people who had been laughing at her were now watching her with respect. They were beginning to understand that they had witnessed something special. They were beginning to realize that they had been wrong about Margaret. Some of the guests had tears in their eyes. The music was touching something deep inside them. They were feeling emotions they had not felt in years. They were remembering what it was like to be moved by art. Margaret played a final song. It was a piece she had written herself many years ago. She had never played it for anyone before. It was about her mother, who had worked so hard to give her a chance at music. It was about dreams that were lost and found again. The song was perfect for the broken piano. It was about making something beautiful out of something damaged. It was about finding hope in difficult situations. It was about the power of music to heal and transform. As Margaret played the final notes, the room remained completely silent. No one moved, no one spoke. They were all processing what they had just experienced. Margaret lifted her hands from the keys. She looked out at the audience for the first time since she had started playing. She saw faces that had been changed by her music. She saw people who had been touched by what she had created. Then something unexpected happened. One person began to clap. then another, then another. Soon the entire room was applauding. They were not clapping politely like they had done during the speeches. They were clapping with genuine appreciation and amazement. Margaret stood up from the piano bench. She was not sure what to do. She had not expected this reaction. She had just wanted to play music. She had not realized that she was about to change everything. Mr. Whitmore was the first to approach her. His face was red with embarrassment. He realized that he had made a terrible mistake. He had tried to humiliate Margaret, but instead he had given her a chance to show her incredible talent. "Margaret," he said quietly, I had no idea. That was extraordinary." Other guests began to approach the stage. They wanted to talk to Margaret. They wanted to understand what they had just witnessed. They wanted to know how the cleaning lady had become such an amazing musician. Margaret was overwhelmed. She had spent 15 years being invisible. Now everyone wanted to talk to her. She was not sure how to handle all the attention. Dr. Sarah Chun, the Academy's director, pushed through the crowd. She was a small woman with kind eyes who had always been polite to Margaret. But now she was looking at her with complete amazement. "Margaret," Dr. Chun said, "where did you learn to play like that? That was that was professional level. That was conservatory level." Margaret did not know what to say. She had kept her secret for so long. She was not ready to tell her story to a room full of strangers, but she knew that her secret was out. She knew that everything had changed. She knew that she could not go back to being invisible. The music had set her free, and there was no going back. The guests continued to applaud. They continued to stare at her with amazement. They were beginning to understand that they had witnessed something truly special. They had seen a miracle happen right in front of them. Margaret looked at the broken piano that had made this all possible. The piano that everyone had wanted to throw away had given her the chance to show who she really was. The piano that seemed worthless had become the most valuable thing in the room. She knew that her life was about to change in ways she could not imagine. She knew that she would have to tell her story. She knew that she would have to explain how a simple cleaning lady had become such an extraordinary musician, but for now, she just stood on the stage and listened to the applause. She listened to the sound of people who had been touched by music. She listened to the sound of her own life changing forever. The broken piano sat silently behind her, its job done. It had helped Margaret find her voice again. It had helped her step out of the shadows and into the light. It had helped her remember who she really was. Margaret Collins was no longer just a cleaning lady. She was a musician again, and everyone in the room knew it. The applause continued for several minutes. Margaret stood on the stage, still not believing what had just happened. She had revealed her secret to a room full of strangers. She had played music in public for the first time in over 40 years. Dr. Chun was the first to ask the question that everyone was thinking. She looked at Margaret with curious eyes and spoke in a gentle voice. "Margaret, I need to ask you something important. Where did you learn to play like that? That was not amateur playing. That was professional level. That was conservatory training." Margaret felt her heart beating fast. She had kept her secret for so long. She was not sure she was ready to tell the truth. But she knew she had no choice. Everyone was waiting for an answer. "I went to school for music," Margaret said quietly. "A long time ago. What school?" Dr. Chun asked gently. Margaret took a deep breath. "Juilliard," she said. "I went to Juilliard." The room became very quiet. Everyone knew about Juilliard. It was the most famous music school in the world. Only the most talented students were accepted there. Only the best musicians graduated from there. Mr. Whitmore stared at Margaret with his mouth open. He could not believe what he had just heard. The cleaning lady that he had tried to humiliate was a graduate of Juilliard. She was more educated in music than most of the teachers at the academy. "When did you graduate?" Dr. Chun asked. "I didn't graduate," Margaret said. "I only went for 2 years. I had to leave." "Why did you leave?" Someone in the crowd asked. Margaret looked down at her hands. This was the hardest part of her story to tell. It was the part that still made her sad after all these years. My mother got sick, she said. She had cancer. I had to go home to take care of her. I thought I would go back to school after she got better. But she died, and I never went back. The room was silent. Everyone was beginning to understand Margaret's story. She had given up her dreams to take care of her mother. She had sacrificed her career to do what was right. Dr. Chun looked at Margaret with new respect. How long were you at Juilliard? 2 years, Margaret said. I had a full scholarship. I was studying classical piano and composition. And you've been working here as a janitor for 15 years? Dr. Chun asked. Margaret nodded. I needed a job. I saw the opening here and applied. I thought it might be nice to work around music again, even if I wasn't playing. But you have been playing, Dr. Chun said. Haven't you? Margaret's face turned red. She had been caught. I sometimes play in the practice rooms after everyone goes home. I know I'm not supposed to. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, Dr. Chun said quickly. You've been playing our pianos for 15 years? Yes, Margaret said. Every night. I couldn't stop myself. Music is ... It's who I am. The guests began to understand what had happened. For 15 years, Margaret had been living a double life. During the day, she was a janitor that no one noticed. At night, she was a musician practicing alone in the dark. A woman in the crowd spoke up. What pieces do you know how to play? Margaret thought for a moment. I know most of the classical repertoire. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin. I also know jazz and blues. I've written some of my own music too. You compose? Dr. Chun asked, surprised. A little, Margaret said. That last piece I played tonight was one of mine. I wrote it for my mother. The guests were amazed. Not only could Margaret play music at a professional level, but she could also create her own music. This was not just talent. This was genius. An older man in the crowd stepped forward. He was wearing an expensive suit and had gray hair. My name is Professor Williams, he said. I teach piano at the university. I've been listening to you play, and I have to say your technique is extraordinary. You have a gift. Margaret did not know what to say. She was not used to receiving compliments about her music. She had been hiding it for so long. How do you practice? Professor Williams asked. How do you maintain that level of skill without formal lessons? I listen to recordings, Margaret said. I have a radio in my apartment. I listen to classical music and jazz. I learn by ear. And I practice every night on the school pianos. Every night for 15 years? Professor Williams asked. Margaret nodded. I couldn't stop. Music is like breathing for me. I need it to live. The crowd was beginning to understand the tragedy of Margaret's situation. She had incredible talent, but she had been forced to hide it. She had been working as a janitor while having the skills of a professional musician. A young woman in the crowd spoke up. Why didn't you ever try to perform? Why didn't you try to get back into music professionally? Margaret looked sad. I thought it was too late. I thought I had missed my chance. I thought no one would want to hear an old cleaning lady play piano. But you're amazing, the young woman said. You're better than most professional musicians. I've heard, Margaret shook her head. I'm just a janitor. I clean floors and empty trash. That's what I do. No, Dr. Chun said firmly. That's what you've been doing. But that's not who you are. You're a musician. You've always been a musician, Margaret began to cry. She had held back these emotions for so long. She had convinced herself that she was just a cleaning lady. She had forgotten that she was anything else. I gave up my dreams, she said through her tears. I gave up everything to take care of my mother. And then I was too scared to try again. Mr. Whitmore stepped forward. He looked embarrassed and ashamed. Margaret, I owe you an apology. I asked you to play as a joke. I thought it would be funny. I had no idea who you were. I'm sorry, Margaret looked at him with kind eyes. You don't need to apologize. You gave me a chance to play in front of people again. You gave me a gift. But I was trying to humiliate you, Mr. Whitmore said. Instead, you set me free, Margaret said. I've been hiding my music for 15 years. Tonight I remembered what it feels like to share it with other people. The guests began to understand what they had witnessed. They had seen more than just a good performance. They had seen a woman rediscover herself. They had seen someone find their way back to their true purpose. Dr. Chun had been thinking while Margaret told her story. She had an idea, but she was not sure if it was the right time to suggest it. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I want to ask you something. Would you be interested in teaching here? We could use someone with your skills and experience." Margaret stared at her. "Teaching? You mean ... teaching piano?" "Yes," Dr. Chun said. "You have the training, you have the talent. Most importantly, you have the passion. I think you would be an excellent teacher." Margaret could not believe what she was hearing. "But I'm just a janitor. I don't have the right credentials." "You have something more important than credentials," Dr. Chun said. "You have the ability to make music come alive. You have the ability to touch people's hearts. That's what great teachers do." The guests began to agree. They had been moved by Margaret's playing. They could see that she had something special. "To offer, I would need to think about it," Margaret said. "I'm not sure I'm ready for such a big change." "Take your time," Dr. Chun said. "But I want you to know that the offer is real. We would be honored to have you on our faculty." Margaret looked around the room at all the faces watching her. These people had started the evening thinking she was just a cleaning lady. Now they were offering her a chance to be a teacher, professor. Williams spoke up again. "Margaret, I want you to know that what you did tonight was remarkable. You took a broken instrument and made it sing. You created beauty from something that seemed hopeless. That's what great musicians do. But more than that," he continued, "you showed us something about perseverance. You never stopped practicing. You never stopped believing in music, even when you had to hide it. That's a lesson worth teaching." Margaret wiped her eyes. She was overwhelmed by all the kind words. "I don't know what to say. I never expected anything like this to happen." "Say, you'll consider it," Dr. Chun urged. "Say you'll think about sharing your gift with our students?" Margaret nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. I promise I'll think about it." The evening was getting late, but no one wanted to leave. The guests wanted to talk to Margaret more. They wanted to understand how someone could hide such incredible talent for so long. A wealthy businessman approached Margaret. "I have to ask," he said, "didn't it make you sad to clean the pianos that you could play better than most of the students?" Margaret smiled sadly. "Sometimes, but I was also grateful. Being around music, even as a janitor, was better than being away from it completely. I could hear the students practicing. I could be near the instruments I loved. And playing alone at night," the man continued, "wasn't that lonely?" "Sometimes," Margaret admitted, "but music was my friend. Even when I was alone, I wasn't really alone. I had the music." A young music student who had been serving drinks at the gala came forward. She was about 20 years old and had been listening to everything. "Miss Collins," she said shyly, "I've been a student here for 3 years. I think I've heard you playing at night sometimes. I always wondered who it was. The music was so beautiful." Margaret looked surprised. "You heard me?" A few times," the girl said. "When I stayed late to practice, I could hear someone playing in the distance. It was always so perfect, so emotional. I thought it must be one of the professors." "You never said anything?" Margaret did not sleep much that night. She lay in her small bed above the bakery, thinking about everything that had happened. Her mind kept replaying the moment when she sat down at the broken piano. She kept hearing the applause from the wealthy guests who had discovered her secret, but most of all, she kept thinking about Dr. Chun's offer. Could she really become a teacher? Could she really leave her job as a janitor and become a musician again? The next morning, Margaret got dressed in her blue uniform as usual. She walked to the academy just like she had done every day for 15 years, but everything felt different. When she walked through the front door, the security guard smiled at her. "Good morning, Miss Collins," he said. "I heard about last night. That's amazing." Margaret was surprised. She had not expected the news to spread so quickly. Thank you, she said quietly. As she walked through the hallways, students and teachers looked at her differently. Some of them smiled and nodded, others stared with curiosity. Margaret felt uncomfortable with all the attention. She was not used to being noticed. When she reached the supply closet where she kept her cleaning equipment, Dr. Chun was waiting for her. "Good morning, Margaret," Dr. Chun said with a warm smile. "How are you feeling today?" "Confused," Margaret admitted. "I don't know what to do with myself. Everything feels different." "I understand," Dr. Chun said. "A lot has changed very quickly. But I hope you've been thinking about my offer." Margaret nodded. "I have been thinking about it, but I'm scared. I haven't taught anyone in over 40 years. What if I'm not good at it?" "Margaret," Dr. Chun said gently, "you've been teaching yourself for 15 years. Every night when you practiced, you were learning and growing. That takes discipline and dedication. Those are the qualities of a good teacher." "But teaching other people is different," Margaret said. "What if the students don't respect me?" "What? If they think I'm just a cleaning lady pretending to be a musician?" Dr. Chun looked at Margaret seriously. "Let me tell you something. Last night you did something that most professional musicians couldn't do. You took a broken instrument and made it beautiful. You created music that moved people to tears. Anyone who heard you play knows that you're the real thing." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "What would I teach?" "Piano, of course," Dr. Chun said. "But also something more important. You would teach students about perseverance. You would teach them that it's never too late to follow your dreams. You would teach them that true musicians never stop being musicians, no matter what job they have to do to survive." That afternoon, Margaret made a decision. She asked Dr. Chun if she could observe some piano lessons. She wanted to see what teaching at the academy was like. Margaret sat in the back of a classroom and watched Professor Martinez teach a group of teenage students. The students were good, but Margaret could see that some of them were struggling. They knew the right notes to play, but they were not feeling the music. During a break, one of the students approached Margaret. It was the same young woman who had spoken to her at the gala. "Miss Collins," the girl said, "I'm so excited that you might teach here. Could I ask you a question about your playing last night?" "Of course," Margaret said. "How did you make the broken piano sound so beautiful?" "I've been playing for 10 years and I could never do what you did." Margaret thought about the question. "I think it's because I wasn't trying to fight the piano." She said, "I was trying to work with it. The broken keys weren't my enemy. They were just part of the instrument I had to play." The student looked confused. "I don't understand." "In life," Margaret explained, "we all have broken parts. We all have things that don't work the way they're supposed to. Good musicians learn to make music with whatever they have. They don't wait for perfect conditions." The student's eyes lit up. "So you're saying that limitations can actually make music more interesting?" "Exactly," Margaret said. "Some of the most beautiful music comes from working within limitations. It forces you to be creative. It forces you to find new ways to express yourself." Professor Martinez had been listening to the conversation. He approached Margaret with interest. "That's a very wise way to think about music," he said. "I've been teaching for 20 years and I've never heard it explained quite that way." Margaret felt embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt your class." "Please don't apologize," Professor Martinez said. "That was exactly what these students needed to hear. Would you mind sharing more of your thoughts with them?" Margaret was nervous, but she agreed. She spent the next hour talking with the students about music. She told them about her own journey. She explained how she had learned to find music in unexpected places. The students were fascinated. They asked her question after question. They wanted to know how she had maintained her skills while working as a janitor. They wanted to know how she had learned to play by ear. Margaret found that she enjoyed talking to the students. She enjoyed sharing what she had learned over the years. Teaching felt natural to her. After the class, Professor Martinez spoke to Margaret privately. "You're a natural teacher," he said. "The students were more engaged today than they've been all semester. You have a gift for explaining music in a way that makes sense to them." That evening, Margaret made her decision. She went to Dr. Chun's office and knocked on the door. "Come in," Dr. Chun called. Margaret entered the office nervously. "Dr. Chun, I've been thinking about your offer." "And? I would like to try," Margaret said. "I would like to try being a teacher," Dr. Chun smiled widely. "That's wonderful, Margaret." "I'm so glad, but I have some conditions," Margaret said. "I want to start slowly. Maybe I could teach just a few students at first. And I want to keep working as a janitor part-time. I'm not ready to give that up completely yet." "Of course," Dr. Chun said. "We can arrange whatever makes you comfortable. The important thing is that you're willing to share your gifts with our students." Over the next few weeks, Margaret began her new life as a part-time teacher. She taught piano lessons 3 days a week and worked as a janitor the other 2 days. It was the perfect arrangement for her. Margaret discovered that she loved teaching. Each student was different, and each one taught her something new. She helped a shy boy find confidence through music. She showed a talented but impatient girl how to slow down and feel the emotion in each note. The students loved Margaret too. They called her Professor Margaret, even though she did not have an official degree. They respected her because they could see her passion for music. They trusted her because she understood what it was like to struggle. Word about Margaret began to spread beyond the academy. A local newspaper wrote a story about the janitor who became a teacher. A radio station invited her to talk about her experience. People began to call her an inspiration, but the most important change was in Margaret herself. She no longer felt like she was hiding. She no longer felt ashamed of who she was. She was proud to be both a teacher and a janitor. She was proud to show her students that dignity comes from doing your best at whatever job you have. 6 months after the gala, the Academy held another special event. This time, Margaret was invited as an honored guest, not as a worker. She performed again, but this time she played on a perfectly tuned piano. The music was beautiful, but it was different from her performance on the broken piano. That night at the gala had been about overcoming obstacles. This performance was about celebrating possibilities. After her performance, Margaret's students surprised her. They had arranged to have the old broken piano restored. It was brought onto the stage and they presented it to her as a gift. "This piano brought you back to us," one of her students said. "We wanted to make sure it would be here for future students to learn from." Margaret was moved to tears. She sat down at the restored piano and played the same piece she had played that first night. But now it sounded different. The broken keys had been fixed, but Margaret played it the same way she had when it was broken. She had learned that beauty was not about perfection. It was about making the best of what you have. The Academy decided to keep the piano in a place of honor. They put a small plaque on it that read, "In honor of Margaret Collins, who taught us that music lives in the heart, not in the instrument." As the years passed, Margaret became one of the most beloved teachers at the Academy. Her students went on to win competitions and earn scholarships. But more importantly, they learned that music was about more than technical skill. They learned that it was about courage, perseverance, and finding beauty in unexpected places. Margaret never forgot the night that changed her life. She never forgot the broken piano that gave her the chance to be herself again. And she never forgot the lesson she learned that night, that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. On quiet evenings, Margaret would sometimes play that restored piano alone in the empty recital hall. She would remember her mother, who had sacrificed so much to give her a chance at music. She would remember her young self at Juilliard, full of dreams and possibilities, but most of all, she would remember that night when a cruel joke became a miracle. She would remember how the worst moment of her evening became the best moment of her life. Margaret Collins had learned that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most broken instruments.